People in the town still tell this story like a warning and a blessing at the same time. They say it began on an
You
ordinary
look
night in an
enchanting
ordinary
tonight.
café
Not as
when a
enchanting as you,
tired
my
young
dear.
waitress placed a simple red rose in front of the most dangerous man who had ever walked through their doors, without knowing who or what he truly was. The rain had been falling all evening, soft and steady, tapping against the café windows like restless fingers. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of coffee, cinnamon, and something
You look
faintly burnt from the
enchanting
kitchen.
tonight.
Not as
Mara moved
enchanting
between
as
the
you, my
tables
dear.
with the quiet speed of someone who had been on her feet since sunrise, her ponytail slightly loose, her white shirt wrinkled at the
Is it
cuffs.
the war?
She was exhausted, but she smiled anyway. That was the one thing she refused to lose, her kindness. He sat at the back table where the light did not quite reach. Always the same seat. Always the same posture, straight, still, hands folded
You look
politely on the
enchanting
table as if
tonight.
carved from
Not as
stone.
enchanting as
No
you, my dear.
phone, no book, he simply watched. The other waiters traded his table like a curse. They said he never spoke, never blinked, and whenever he came in, the lights over his table flickered just for a second. They joked about him being a ghost or a demon, but the way they avoided his eyes was not a joke at all. To Mara, he was just the silent customer. Pale, yes. Dressed too elegantly for a small-town cafe, yes. There was something old in his face, a sharpness in his cheekbones, a stillness in his lips that made him look like he belonged in a painting instead of real life. But he had never been rude. He always left money on the table, more than the bill. And to Mara, that was enough reason not to be afraid. She noticed details others ignored. The way his fingers tightened almost imperceptibly whenever someone laughed too loudly. The way he closed his eyes for a heartbeat each time the door opened, and a gust of night air swept in, as if the scent of the outside world hurt him. The way he stared at the small glass of dark red wine he always ordered, as if it reminded him of something he wished he could forget. Tonight, he arrived later than usual. The bell above the door chimed softly, and every head in the cafe turned. His long black coat was damp from the rain, the fabric shining under the low lights. As he stepped in, a cold draft followed, strong enough to make the nearest candle tremble. He paused just inside the doorway, his gaze sweeping the room once, measuring every heartbeat, every breath. Then his eyes, an unsettling, deep crimson that most people pretended not to see, settled on his usual table. Myra felt a shiver travel down her spine, but she steadied the tray in her hands and forced her legs to move. Fear, she had learned, was not always a warning. Sometimes it was just the echo of other people's stories. She believed in making her own. She approached his table, the floor creaking under her step. Up close, he was even more unsettling. There was no stubble on his face, no softness. Just flawless, almost luminous skin and lips pressed in a narrow, controlled line. His eyes lifted to her slowly, as if it cost him something to meet her gaze. "Good evening," she said, her voice gentle but steady. "The usual." He hesitated, the silence between them stretching longer than was comfortable. The cafe noise seemed to recede. Somewhere behind her, the espresso machine hissed, but here, at this table, the world narrowed to the space between his crimson eyes and her quiet courage. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Myra wrote nothing down. She already knew. One glass of red wine, nothing else, never food, never dessert. Just the one drink which he sipped so slowly it hardly seemed to disappear at all. She turned to walk away, but as she did, she passed the counter, where a small metal bucket held a few tired roses. Leftover from a romantic promotion the manager had tried the week before. Most were drooping, petals soft at the edges. But one lying on its side was still bright, its red rich and alive, as if it had been waiting for someone to notice it. Myra's hand moved before she fully understood why. Maybe it was the way the silent customer's shoulders always looked like they were carrying a weight no one else could see. Maybe it was the loneliness that clung to him like another layer of clothing. Or maybe it was just that she believed no one should sit alone at a table without at least one beautiful thing in front of them. She picked up the rose. When she returned with his wine, the cafe lights glowed soft gold around them. She set the glass down with practiced ease. Then gently, she placed the single red rose beside it, its stem crossing the edge of his dark sleeve. For a second, her fingers brushed the back of his hand. His skin was cold, not the ordinary cold of winter, but a deep, ancient chill that seemed to sink into her bones and make her breath catch. He froze. No one had touched him like that, in a very, very long time. Mara pulled her hand back quickly, not from fear, but from surprise at the intensity of the sensation. "I thought your table looked a little empty," she said, forcing a small smile. "This one was going to be thrown away. It deserved better, so do you." Her words hung in the air between them, fragile and unguarded. For the first time since he had started coming to the cafe, the man's expression changed. Just a flicker like the softest crack in a layer of ice. His eyes lowered to the rose. He stared at it as if it were something dangerous or holy. The tips of his fingers hovered over the petals, not quite touching, as if he feared that contact would destroy it, or him. In his mind, he heard another voice from centuries ago, whispering his true name with the same uncalculated kindness. He remembered a different rose, a different table, a different life, before thrones of stone and oceans of darkness. A time when his heart had not yet been taught to fear its own beating. He swallowed, and even that small movement seemed difficult. "Why?" he asked at last, his voice low, velvet, and rough with disuse. One word, but it made Mara blink. No one had heard him speak here, not once. "Because," she looked at him carefully, seeing not his expensive coat or his perfect posture, but the exhaustion in his eyes, the loneliness in the way he sat slightly apart from the world. "Because you look like you haven't been given something freely in a long time." He stared at her, really stared, as if trying to see through her skin into the chambers of her heart. Normally, when he did that to people, they flinched, mumbled an excuse, and walked away faster. Mara did not. Her hands trembled just a little, but she did not step back. In that moment, something shifted inside him. It was not loud or dramatic. It was quieter than a sigh. But for a creature who had not changed in centuries, who believed his fate was carved in stone and blood, that tiny movement felt like an earthquake. Her kindness pressed against the walls he had built around his heart, searching for a door he had sworn never to open again. Around them, the café hummed on, unaware that a king of the night was fighting the most dangerous battle of his eternal life, the temptation to care. He wanted to warn her, to tell her that her world would never be the same if she kept looking at him like that, as if he were not a monster but a man who could still be saved. He opened his mouth, ready to say something, anything, that might push her away, protect her from himself. But before he could speak, the overhead lights flickered violently, once, twice, then steadied. Every candle flame on every table bent suddenly toward him, drawn as if by an invisible current. A cold, unnatural wind slipped through the closed windows, causing napkins to flutter and chatter to fade into uneasy murmurs. Mara's eyes widened, and for the first time a hint of fear crossed her face. She glanced around the room, then back at him, as if silently asking, "Did you do that?" He did not move, could not, because even as the cafe shivered around him, he felt something else, something far more terrifying, stirring awake in his chest. A slow, heavy thump, then another. A rhythm he had not heard inside his own body for longer than any human memory could stretch. His heart, it was beating. He lifted a hand to his chest, fingers pressed against the fabric as if he needed proof. His crimson eyes sharpened, not with hunger, but with shock, almost wonder. The rose on the table seemed to glow deeper, its redness echoing the impossible warmth blooming beneath his ribs. Mara watched his hand tremble over his heart, watched his unreadable face pale even further, and felt a strange pull inside her own chest, an aching curiosity mixed with concern. "Are you okay?" she whispered, the simple question carrying more honesty than any elaborate speech. He looked up at her, and in his gaze there was no longer just distance and darkness. There was a storm of something new, something raw and fragile and dangerous. "Mara," he said softly, speaking her name as if tasting it, as if it mattered. She hadn't told him her name that night, not yet. Her breath caught, "How do you?" He didn't answer. Instead, he dropped his gaze back to the rose, his jaw tightening with a decision he did not want to make. For centuries, he had ruled from shadows, untouched, untouchable, believing his heart was dead, and that this was the price of keeping the world safe from what he truly was. Now, with a single act of kindness, a human girl had awakened the one thing he could not afford to feel. If his heart had truly begun to beat again, it meant only one thing: fate had chosen her. and that meant every creature that hunted in the dark would soon feel it too. While Mara stood there, waiting for an answer she did not yet know was impossible, he slowly wrapped his cold fingers around the stem of the rose. A single thorn pricked his skin. A tiny drop of dark, ancient blood slid down to the tablecloth, so small no one else would notice. He stared at that lonely drop, then at her open, worried face, and realized with a jolt of terror and awe that his eternity had just changed course. "Forgive me," he whispered, so softly she almost didn't hear it. "For what?" she asked, confusion and a strange, growing dread twisting in her stomach. He lifted his eyes to hers, the storm inside them breaking wide open, and in that gaze was a promise he did not yet know how to keep, and a danger he could no longer deny. "For what is about to happen, because you gave your kindness to the wrong king," he said, voice trembling between warning and plea. Before Mara could respond, the café door burst open with a violent crack, though no hand touched it, and a gust of freezing wind swept in, killing every candle flame at once and plunging the room into trembling shadows that seemed to be looking for her. The sudden darkness felt heavier than it should have, as if it had weight, as if it had intention. Conversations died mid-sentence. Glasses stopped halfway to lips. Someone at the far table let out a nervous laugh that broke off too quickly, like a match that couldn't catch. Mara's first instinct was simple and human: move. She reached for the small lighter kept in her apron pocket, fingers shaking as she flicked it on. A tiny flame bloomed, casting a soft orange circle against the nearest overturned candle. The wick sputtered, then caught, struggling against the unnatural chill. Around her, phones lit up one by one, screens glowing with confused faces and whispered questions. "Did a fuse blow? Must be the storm. That door, did you see it?" People leaned closer to each other, looking for comfort, for logic. No one wanted to admit that the darkness felt wrong. Only Mara noticed that the cold seemed deepest near one table, his. She turned, the small flame in her hand trembling, and found him exactly where he had been, sitting perfectly still. Yet something had changed. The shadows clung to his shoulders as if they recognized him, gathering around him like loyal soldiers awaiting orders. His eyes, no longer dulled by centuries of patience, glowed faintly in the gloom, a deeper red now, awakened and alert. Her breath caught. It was one thing to ignore rumors. It was another to see something your mind had no place to store. For a heartbeat, she wanted to back away, to pretend she hadn't seen that unnatural light in his gaze. But there was the rose, still resting by his hand, its petals rich and full in the darkness. Her rose. "Mara," his voice cut through the low murmur of the café, meant only for her, yet it seemed to echo inside her bones. "Listen to me, you must not be afraid." "That," she said quietly, swallowing hard, "is not how fear works." He almost smiled at that, just a fragile hint at the corner of his mouth. It made him look, for the briefest moment, painfully human. "No," he agreed. "It is, but you are braver than you know. You proved that when you brought me this." He lifted the rose, turning it between his fingers. A flicker of candlelight caught on the tiny drop of drying blood at its stem. Mara's eyes followed it, her mind piecing together details it hadn't wanted to see. The impossible chill of his skin, the way the lights had responded to his presence, the way he spoke her name without being told. She felt a tremor of understanding, not full, not clear, but enough to set her heart racing. "Who are you?" she whispered. He looked at her for a long moment, and in that silence the noise of the café swelled. Someone complaining loudly about the lights, another voice trying to call the manager, a child beginning to whimper. But between Mara and the man at the back table, all of that was distant, like sound heard underwater. "Not here," he said at last. "Not like this." "Excuse me," the manager's voice cut in, sharp and brittle with stress. He appeared near Mara's shoulder, fussing with his tie, eyes already moving past her toward the silent customer. "Sir, we're very sorry for the inconvenience. We're having technical issues. The staff will bring out candles to every table. If you'd like, your drink is on the house." The man's gaze flicked lazily to the manager, and for the first time, Mara saw something cold and ancient pass over his features, a weight of authority that belonged in throne rooms, not coffee shops. The manager's words stumbled and died half-formed on his tongue. His confident posture wilted. He suddenly looked like a boy in a shirt too big for him. "It will be over soon," the man said calmly, his accent softening the edges of each word with an old-world cadence. "Ask everyone to remain inside. It is safer that way." The manager blinked as if waking from a brief, confusing dream. "Right, yes, inside. Everyone, please stay calm, we're just waiting out the storm." He hurried away, not quite understanding why he was obeying a stranger, only that it felt necessary. Mara watched this, feeling the ground of her reality tilt. She turned back to the man, her voice hushed. "What did you do to him?" "I nudged his fear," the man replied, unflinching. "Gave it a direction. Better he be cautious than foolish. Better they stay together where I can protect them." The word slipped out so naturally that Mara's heart snagged on it. Protect. "You're scaring them," she said, though she wasn't sure if she meant the manager, the customers, or herself. "I am not the one you should fear tonight," he answered quietly. His eyes darkened as he tilted his head, listening to something she could not hear. "They are close." "Who?" she asked. He let out a long, slow breath as if he had been hoping not to be asked. "Those who feel what I feel, those who are drawn to change." Mara's fingers curled around the lighter, the tiny flame starting to burn her thumb. She extinguished it with a soft click, leaving only the scattered candles and phone screens casting restless shadows. "I don't understand." "You will." His gaze softened, and he seemed to wrestle with himself, torn between distance and confession. "Mara, for centuries my heart has been still. It has been my greatest strength and my greatest curse. Tonight, because of you, it began to beat again." He pressed his hand more firmly to his chest, as if reassuring himself. Such a thing does not go unnoticed. There it was again, that impossible claim. His heart not beating before now. Mara tried to laugh it off, but the sound died in her throat. This was not a joke. The air around him, the unnatural cold, the way the night itself seemed to lean against the windows, it all pressed in on her with undeniable force. "Are you saying?" The word felt ridiculous in her mouth, too big, too unreal, and yet the only one that fit. "Are you saying you're some kind of vampire?" The room did not react. No one else heard. The word fell between them like a secret dropped into a bottomless well. His eyes did not flinch. He did not smile. He simply held her gaze and let the truth rest there unhidden. "I am saying," he answered slowly, carefully, "that I am not what you are, and that my existence has required a kind of hunger that I have spent lifetimes learning to control. You, of all people, deserve honesty, but I will not frighten you with stories of what I once was." His voice carried no boast, no pride, only a quiet, haunted weariness. Mara's heart hammered against her ribs. Part of her wanted to back away, to drop the tray, to run out the door into the rain and pretend this night had never happened. But another part, stubborn, compassionate, deeply human, refused to abandon the man who looked at her as if she were the first unscripted moment in his eternal life. "If you're dangerous," she said, choosing each word with care, "then why do I feel like you're the safest person in this room right now?" Something flickered in his eyes, a quick, sharp pain that looked a lot like hope trying not to believe in itself. "Because you see what I am trying to be," he whispered, almost to himself. "Not only what I have been." A child began to cry louder near the door, frightened by the dark and the rising wind outside. The man's head turned slightly, his features softening at the sound. He closed his eyes just for a second, and when he opened them again, they were calmer, more focused. "They should not have come so close," he murmured, listening again to something beyond the walls. "They can feel my weakness. My heart beating makes me visible to them in ways I have never been." Mara stepped closer without realizing it, drawn by the tension in his voice. "Visible to who?" He looked back at her, and this time, the title he had avoided slipped out as naturally as breath. "To those who would challenge a king when they smell even the smallest hint of vulnerability." The word king hung between them like a tolling bell. It did not sound dramatic on his tongue. It sounded factual, worn, and heavy. "You're not just," her voice dropped further, barely a thread of sound. "You're not just a vampire, you're the one they once called king." he finished quietly. Of a realm that no longer resembles the world outside your window. I have kept my distance for a long time. Let the night forget my name, and I was content to exist that way, until you placed a rose in front of me and reminded my heart what it was made to do. Mara swallowed hard, her throat suddenly dry. Which is what? To love, he said simply. To choose, to protect, to be more than a shadow that passes through history without touching it. The honesty in his voice struck her harder than any supernatural revelation. Behind the impossible titles and in human eyes, she heard something deeply ordinary, a loneliness so profound it had settled into his bones like winter. She thought of herself, too, working double shifts, saving tips in a jar for a future that always seemed 2 steps farther away, going home to a tiny apartment where no one waited for her. She had never put words to it, but her own heart knew something of emptiness. Why me? She asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. Of all the people in all the places you could have gone, why my table? Why my rose? He looked genuinely startled for the first time, as if no one had ever asked him that. He searched her face as though trying to find an answer there. Because you did not look away, he said finally. Everyone else saw something unusual and chose silence, distance, avoidance. You saw the same strangeness and chose kindness. His gaze fell to the rose again. You gave beauty to what you did not understand. That is a powerful kind of courage. Myra felt heat sting her eyes, unexpected and vulnerable. She blinked quickly, not wanting him to see. I just didn't want you to sit alone, she muttered, almost embarrassed by his words. And that, he replied softly, is exactly why you are not safe. He said it with a tenderness that frightened her more than any threat could have. What do you mean? The wind outside rose, rattling the windows. Somewhere in the distance, a low, almost inaudible sound rolled through the night, too long and too deep to be thunder. The lights flickered again, then steadied. Every instinct inside Myra screamed that something was gathering in the dark beyond the glass. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping into a tone meant only for her. When an old heart begins to beat again, it is like a beacon lit on the highest tower. Every creature who lives in the spaces between your nightmares and your doubts will feel it. Some will run from it. Others will be drawn to it. They will come looking for the source of my change. His eyes held hers, unflinching. They will come looking for you. Her blood ran cold. I'm just a waitress, she protested, the words trembling. I'm nobody. No, he said with quiet conviction. You are the one person in this town who dared to believe a stranger might deserve a flower. That is never nobody. In every story that matters, that is the beginning of everything. A dish shattered somewhere in the kitchen, making her jump. The voices in the café grew louder, more anxious. People began gathering their things, talking about leaving despite the manager's pleas. The room felt too small, too fragile, like thin glass under too much pressure. Mara forced herself to steady her breathing. What happens now? She asked. He looked toward the windows, where the rain had become a silver curtain, the streetlights outside dimming strangely, one by one. Now, he said, his voice laced with ancient steel and new uncertainty. I decide whether to remain what I have been or become what your kindness is forcing me to be. He rose from his chair with a fluid grace that made the shadows shift around him. For the first time since he had entered the café weeks ago, people noticed him moving. Heads turned. Conversations faltered. Something in the air thickened, charged with invisible electricity. He stood taller than she had realized, his dark coat falling around him like a cloak. The rose remained in his hand, a single point of red against all that black and silver. As he stepped closer to her, the air grew colder, but his gaze warmed, just slightly, with an emotion that looked dangerously close to devotion. Mara, he said, and her name sounded different now, like a vow. I will not let them take you. You have my word, and my word is not a small thing. But if I choose to stand between you and what is coming, I will not be able to stand apart from your life any longer. She stared up at him, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure he could hear it. What does that mean? It means, he answered, every syllable heavy with intent, that if I protect you tonight, I will be tying your fate to mine. Your life, your choices, your future will never be as simple as they were before you picked up this rose. He opened his hand, offering her the flower back. The petals looked impossibly vivid in the dim light, and on the stem, that single dark droplet of his blood had dried into something like a tiny, glistening ruby. "Take it," he said quietly. "If you accept it, you accept the danger. You accept me, and I will become your shield against a world you do not yet know. If you refuse it, I will walk out that door and disappear. I will draw them away as far as I can, and you will forget this night like a strange dream. Your life will go back to its small, beautiful routines, and you will never see me again." Her hand hovered over the rose, inches away, trembling with the weight of the choice. The café had dissolved into a blur of distant sound and motion. In this moment, there was only her, the flower, and the man whose heart had started beating because of her simple act of kindness. His eyes searched her face, love and fear and humility warring in their depths. "I will not be angry," he added softly. "If you choose safety, it would be the sensible thing, the wise thing, perhaps the right thing." She swallowed, her throat tight. "And if I choose you?" His breath caught, hope flaring so bright it almost hurt to look at. "Then," he said, voice trembling, "you will be loved and protected by the most dangerous heart the night has ever known. And the world you thought you understood will open in ways that will both terrify and transform you." Myra's fingers brushed the velvet petals. A surge of warmth shot up her arm, clashing with the cold that surrounded him. She could walk away. She could pretend this was all nonsense, a trick of fear and bad lighting. Or she could believe that her kindness had awakened something good in someone the world would call a monster. The door rattled under the force of another unnatural gust, as if something outside was impatient, knocking without hands. "Myra," he whispered one last time, gentle and pleading, "choose." Her hand closed around the stem of the rose. And before she could even lift her eyes to meet his, something outside hit the darkened window with a sound that did not belong to any storm, spiderwebbing the glass and making every candle flame in the room bow violently toward the place where she now stood, holding the king's blood on a single fragile flower. The crack of impact against the glass silenced the room. Every head turned toward the front windows, where a spiderweb of fractures spread outward from a single invisible point. The café lights flickered again, as if the building itself had flinched. Somewhere, a chair scraped harshly across the floor. Someone whispered a prayer under their breath. Myra clutched the rose so tightly that a thorn bit into her palm. She felt the sharp sting, then a small warmth as her own blood joined the dried, ancient droplet on the stem. The flower seemed to pulse in her hand, drawing a thin, invisible thread between her and the man beside her. He inhaled sharply, every line of his body going rigid. When he spoke, his voice was no longer just soft and weary. It carried the quiet command of someone used to being obeyed. "Everyone," he said, not loud, but somehow his words reached every corner of the café. "Step away from the windows, now." People hesitated only a heartbeat before something in his tone overrode their doubt. Chairs scraped back. Bodies shifted. Parents pulled their children close. The manager, pale and trembling, started fumbling with his phone, but the man's gaze cut sharply toward him. "There is no signal," he said calmly, as if stating the weather. "You will find only static." The manager looked down at his screen anyway and blanched. "No bars," he whispered, "but that's impossible, we always." The man didn't argue. His attention was no longer on the humans around him. It was fixed on the broken window, where the rain had stopped hitting the glass. It now fell in sheets all around the café, leaving the space directly outside eerily dry. Myra's skin prickled. Her instincts screamed at her to hide, to run, to pretend she had never picked up the rose. But another part of her, the same stubborn core that had placed the flower on his table, kept her rooted beside him. "What is it?" she asked, her voice a thin ribbon of sound. He did not look at her when he answered. "The first," he murmured. "They always send the boldest one ahead." As if in response, a shape shifted just beyond the fractured glass. Not quite visible, not quite invisible, like a smudge of shadow where shadows shouldn't be. It moved with a fluid, predatory grace, circling, testing the barrier between outside and in. Myra's heart hammered. "Is it like you?" "In some ways," he said, "but not in the ways that matter tonight." The shadow paused, then pressed against the glass again. The spiderweb cracks spread farther, tiny shards tinkling onto the sill. A child in the corner began to sob, his cries sharpening the air with panic. Without thinking, Mara stepped slightly in front of the nearest table of customers, her body angled as if she could somehow shield them. It was an instinct older than reason: protect the afraid. The man noticed. Something in his expression softened, even as the danger grew. "You see," he said quietly, almost to himself, "you were always meant to be more than a bystander." He moved then, finally, stepping forward with a speed and silence that took Mara's breath away. One moment he was beside her. The next he stood between the entire room and the faltering window, his coat sweeping like dark wings. "You will not come in," he said, his voice low but resonant, directed at the thing beyond the glass. The words weren't in any modern language Mara recognized, but she understood them anyway. They rolled through the café like a slow wave, pressing against the walls, pressing back against the night. The shadow paused. Then, to Mara's horror, it began to take shape. Not fully, never fully. It remained more absence than substance, more suggestion than form. But she could see eyes, faint and luminous like pale embers. She could see a lean, inhuman outline, limbs too long, angles too sharp. Its gaze fixed not on the man, but on her hand, the hand holding the rose. When it spoke, the sound was like many whispers layered on top of each other. "So it is true," it hissed from the other side of the fractured glass. "The king's heart beats again for a human." The man's shoulders tensed. "You have no claim here," he replied in that old, unearthly tongue, though his eyes never left the creature's. "Turn away, tell the others to forget this place." The creature laughed, a scraping, hollow sound that made several people in the café flinch. "The night has waited too long for your weakness," it said. "We will not turn away. We will watch you fall in love, and then we will watch you fall." Mara didn't need to understand the exact words. The malice in its gaze was enough. Still, she found her own voice, thin but steady. "Why does it care about me?" she whispered. "Because," the man said softly, jaw tight, "they do not understand love, only leverage." The creature's gaze narrowed. "Share her," it whispered. "Share the source of your change, and we will let this place live. Keep her to yourself, and we will drag her into the dark and let the world listen to her scream." A ripple of fear passed through the humans in the room, some of whom understood nothing except the tone, but that was enough. Myra's stomach lurched. The threat was not dramatic, it was cold and calculating. The man raised his hand, palm out, and the candles closest to him flared suddenly higher, their flames bending toward the window as if eager to obey. The creature recoiled slightly, its outline wavering. "I will burn down the sky before I give you even a syllable of her fear," he said, his voice no longer quiet. "She is under my protection, under my care, under my heart." Myra felt her breath hitch. Something inside her recognized the truth in his words before her mind could question them. He wasn't just claiming responsibility. He was choosing her, publicly, irrevocably, as the line he would not allow the dark to cross. The creature hissed, the cracks in the glass extending with a long, painful squeal. "Then we will test your strength, king of a broken throne," it spat. "You are not what you were, your heart is soft, your hunger is chained, you will break." It vanished, dissolving into a smear of shadow that flew upward, joining the thick darkness pressing against the glass. The storm outside roared anew, wind howling around the building, making the beams creak. For a long moment, no one in the café moved. Finally, the man turned back to Mara. His face was calm, but his eyes, still glowing faintly red, were a storm of conflicting emotions: determination, fear, tenderness, and something like guilt. "This place is no longer safe," he said quietly. Mara swallowed. "But you said everyone should stay inside." "Until I knew what I faced," he answered. "Now I know. They will not stop with broken glass and threats. They will keep pushing until something gives way. I will not let that something be you." The manager, who had heard almost nothing clearly but could feel that something terrible hovered just beyond comprehension, stumbled forward. "Sir, what is going on? We need to call the police or somebody." "No one you call will know how to fight what waits outside," the man said gently, with a strange kind of humility. But I do, and tonight that must be enough. Mara stepped closer, the rose still cradled in her hand. The sting in her palm had faded into a warm, steady thrum that seemed to echo faintly in her chest. You said if I took this, she murmured, lifting the flower, you would be my shield. Were you telling the truth? His eyes met hers, and something in his expression broke open completely. Whatever distance he had tried to maintain crumbled under the weight of her trust. On my life, he said, on what remains of my crown, on the eternity I once held in my hands and threw away so others could sleep in peace. Yes, Mara, I meant every word. She nodded slowly, her fear threading itself through a growing, stubborn resolve. These people, her manager, the cooks in the back, the regulars who tipped her with coins and kind smiles, had never given her a rose. But they had shared countless small, human moments with her. They were hers in a quiet way, and she would not abandon them. Then we do this together, she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. His brow furrowed. No, absolutely not. I am asking you to trust me by staying behind me, not beside me. You are not meant to fight the night. You are meant to live in the light it surrounds. Mara shook her head, her hand knotted around the rose. You said they're coming because of me, because your heart started beating when I gave you this. So whatever is happening out there, I'm already part of it. Hiding behind you doesn't change that. He opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. Her logic, simple and human, sliced through his instinctive protectiveness. I am stronger than they are, he said instead, as if trying to convince both of them. Older, I have fought wars under moons that no longer rise over this world. I know how this works. And I know this town, she countered softly. I know where the back alley floods when the rain gets like this. I know which doors stick and which windows don't lock. I know the people who are going to panic if they don't see a familiar face telling them it'll be okay. Her voice gentled. We both have something the other doesn't. Maybe that's why this happened. He stared at her, the storm outside reflected in his eyes. Then, to her shock, he lowered his gaze, not in defeat but in respect. A king, humbled by a waitress with a rose in her hand. Very well, he said finally, but you will follow my lead. If I say run, you run. If I say do not look, you close your eyes. If I say stand behind me and do not move, you stand behind you and do not move, she finished for him, a small, shaky smile tugging at her lips. I can do that. Something like pride softened his features. You already are braver than many who called themselves warriors. Another crack shot across the window with a sharp pop. Someone screamed. The manager began ushering people toward the back of the café, toward the kitchen and storage room. Wait, Mara called out, her tone calm enough to pause the rising panic. Dozens of frightened faces turned to her. For a fleeting second, she saw herself as they did. Apron on, hair frizzed slightly from the humidity, hands shaking just enough to betray her fear. No crown, no cloak, just a girl who had always tried to be kind. We're going to move everyone to the storeroom, she said, glancing at the man for quiet confirmation. He gave the slightest nod. There's no windows there and the walls are thick. Stay together. Don't open the door for anyone unless you hear my voice or his. She gestured to the man beside her. No matter what you hear outside, okay. But who are you? Someone demanded from the back. And who is he? Mara met the crowd's fearful eyes and answered with the only truth that mattered in that moment. I'm the one who's going to make sure you get out of this, she said, and he's the one who's going to help me. The man looked at her, something like awe glinting in his gaze. For centuries, he had been the one to reassure, command, decide. To hear her speak with such quiet certainty stirred something in him that had nothing to do with ancient power and everything to do with newfound faith. Under her direction, with the man's unnerving, calming presence at her side, the café emptied toward the back, leaving only the two of them near the front windows. The room felt bigger, somehow, and emptier. The silence between each creak of the building grew heavier. When the last person had disappeared through the swinging kitchen door, Mara exhaled slowly. They'll be safe there. As safe as they can be, he replied, eyes never leaving the fractured glass. The night rarely bothers with rooms that hold no leverage. She swallowed, so that leaves us. Yes, he said, it leaves us. The wind howled again, and this time Myra heard something inside it. Laughter, too thin and too cruel to belong to any human throat. Shadows thickened along the edges of the windows like frost. Will they break through? She asked. If they believe I will not fight back, he said, or if they believe I cannot. She looked down at the rose, at the twin marks of blood on the stem, his ancient, hers new. Can you, she asked softly, fight like you used to with your heart like this? He hesitated. That more than anything frightened her. My strength is different now, he admitted. The discipline I built around emptiness, around hunger without desire, is fractured. A beating heart is a vulnerability, but it is also a source of power I have not felt in a very long time. He turned to her, his gaze searching. I do not yet know what I am capable of in this state. That uncertainty, he forced a breath through his teeth, is why they came. Myra stepped closer, so close now that she could feel the cold aura around him clash with the warmth of her own skin. Then we figure it out, she said simply, together. He studied her for a long heartbeat. Then he took her free hand, carefully, reverently, as if she were made of glass and starlight instead of nerves and coffee stains. His grip was cool but steady, and as their fingers intertwined, the rose between them seemed to glow deeper, its petals drinking in the mingled heat of their joined blood. The moment their hands joined, something shifted. The flickering light steadied. The howling wind outside hit the building like a wave and then parted, flowing around the café instead of clawing at it. The thick, unnatural darkness beyond the windows rippled, as if pushed back by an invisible force. He inhaled sharply. Do you feel that? He whispered. Myra's eyes widened. Yes, she breathed. What is it? He closed his eyes, focusing. It is you, he said slowly, wonder creeping into his voice. Or rather us, your courage, my power, they are. He broke off, shaking his head as if the realization was too large to fit into a single thought. You are anchoring me, stabilizing what my heart has awakened. The shadows beyond the glass recoiled slightly, as if sensing the new equilibrium. A voice rose from the darkness outside, mocking and angry. Hiding behind a mortal old king, it spat. Have you fallen so far? He opened his eyes, crimson burning brighter now, not with hunger but with an almost righteous fire. When he spoke, his words were a blade honed over centuries. I am not hiding behind her, he said. I am standing with her. Myra felt the truth of that statement resonate through her chest like a second heartbeat. Fear still trembled in her, but it no longer ruled her. Listen to me, he said, turning to her again, urgency in every line of his face. In a moment they will push. They will try to break the glass, the walls, the doors, anything. When they do, I will push back. I need you to hold on to me. Do not let go, no matter what you see, no matter what you hear. Can you do that? She nodded, her fingers tightening around his. Yes, she whispered, I can do that. The first real attack came like a silent earthquake. No sound, no visible force, just a sudden crushing pressure that slammed against the café from all sides at once, making the walls groan and the overhead lights explode in showers of sparks. Myra squeezed his hand, teeth clenching as the floor seemed to tilt. He stood firm. The air around them thickened, swirling with dust and electricity. The remaining candles flamed high, then narrow, their light drawn into a tight ring around the two of them. Outside, the shadows writhed and pressed closer, furious that their invisible onslaught had not shattered the building. He raised his free hand, fingers spread, and spoke again in that ancient language, his voice low but firm. The air vibrated with each word, as if reality itself were listening. Myra couldn't understand, but she felt the intent: protection, boundary, defiance. His power rose, meeting the crushing pressure with a wave of invisible force that pushed back, pushing the darkness away from the very walls. Her knees threatened to buckle under the strain, but their joined hands anchored her. She could feel his strength flowing through her, and impossibly, hers flowing back into him. The shadows recoiled once more. The voice outside snarled, You cannot hold forever, your heart will tire, you will break. Perhaps, he called back, still calm, but not tonight. The pressure slammed again, harder. The The cracked window finally gave with a sharp, echoing shatter. Glass rained inward, but before a single shard could cut skin or wood, they froze in midair, suspended like a glittering curtain. Mara gasped. He exhaled slowly, sweat beating at his temple. "Hold," he murmured to her, "just a moment longer." Their joined hands burned now, the rose trapped between their palms, its petals beginning to curl at the edges like a price paid. Mara's arm shook with the effort, but she refused to let go. She thought of the regular who always forgot his umbrella and laughed it off. The teacher who graded papers at the corner table. The old woman who tipped in exact change and thanked Mara for listening to her stories. Faces flashed through her mind, and with each one, something stubborn and bright surged in her chest. "We're not breaking," she whispered through gritted teeth. "Not for them." He heard the determination in her tone and drew strength from it. His shoulders straightened, his eyes blazing brighter than they had when he wore a crown in a palace of shadows. "You hear her?" he called to the darkness, his voice ringing with a fierce, quiet joy. "This is why you will lose. You have never understood a heart that chooses to stand for others." There was a final, furious push from the night. The building shuddered, plates toppling in the silent kitchen, a light fixture crashing to the floor. Mara cried out, but did not release his hand. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the pressure broke. Silence fell thick and ringing. The crushed darkness outside thinned, shadows peeling back like smoke caught in a rising wind. The howling eased to a normal storm's roar. The unnatural chill along the windows dissolved, leaving only the ordinary cold of rain-slick glass. He sagged slightly, catching himself before his knees hit the floor. Mara stumbled with him, their hands still locked because neither trusted what would happen if they let go. For several long breaths, all they could hear was their own ragged inhaling. "Did we?" Mara began, voice shaking. "Yes," he said hoarsely. "We did. For tonight, at least, we pushed them back." He glanced toward the broken window where the glass shards still hung suspended in the air like a field of stars. With a small, tired motion of his hand, he guided them gently to the floor in a careful, glittering arc, not a single shard flying astray. Mara stared. "That's beautiful," she murmured. He gave a weak, weary half-smile. "You have a strange idea of beauty." She looked at him then, really looked. He seemed smaller somehow, not in stature but in weight, as if the burden he carried had shifted, shared between them. "You're hurt," she said softly. "Only tired," he replied. "More tired than most battles have made me. Fighting with an open heart is heavier than fighting with an empty one." The kitchen door creaked open just a sliver. The manager's frightened face appeared. "Is it over?" he asked, voice trembling. The man turned his head, his regal calm slipping back into place like a familiar cloak. "For tonight," he said. "You may come out, but be cautious near the window." People emerged slowly, eyes wide, taking in the shattered glass, the strange quiet, the two figures still standing hand in hand near the center of the room. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "What happened? Was it an earthquake? Did you feel that pressure? I couldn't breathe." Mara released his hand gently, and the sudden absence of contact felt like stepping away from a warm fireplace into cold air. Her fingers still tingled where they had touched his. "We're okay," she said, forcing her voice to be steady for their sake. "Everyone's okay, that's what matters." A child, wide-eyed, clutching a stuffed animal, peeked around her mother's leg and looked up at Mara. "Did you stop the monsters?" he asked earnestly. Mara's throat tightened. She glanced at the man who watched her with quiet encouragement. Then she knelt to the child's level. "We stopped them from getting in tonight," she said gently. "And sometimes that's how you win, one night at a time." The child seemed satisfied with that. He nodded solemnly and retreated to his mother's arms. As the customers gathered their belongings and the manager fussed about calling a repair service, Mara drifted back to the man's side, the rose now slightly wilted in her hand. Up close, she could see faint lines of strain around his eyes, a fatigue that went deeper than muscles. "Will they come back?" she asked quietly. He nodded once. "Yes, they will not forget, my heart beating, your blood on my rose. These are not small things in the world they inhabit. She swallowed. Then this isn't over. No, he said, but it has changed. He looked at her with an intensity that made her chest ache. Before tonight, I believed my role was to rule from the shadows, to keep my distance so the world above could pretend it was alone. I told myself that was mercy, that was humility. He shook his head faintly. But mercy without connection is just absence. You did not save me with power, Mara. You saved me with presence, with a flower and a simple kindness given without demand. Her eyes stung again. I only did what anyone would do. Anyone could, he corrected softly. Very few would, fewer still when they feel fear. You chose to see a person where others saw a threat. That choice changed the course of my eternity. A tear slipped down her cheek then, not from fear, but from the weight of being seen so clearly. So what happens now, she whispered, to you, to us? He stepped closer, careful and deliberate, as if every movement were a promise. Now, he said, I stop running from what my heart wants, and I stop pretending that keeping my distance is the same as keeping you safe. He looked toward the broken window, where the last remnants of unnatural shadow faded into the ordinary night. I will have to face them, not just as a king of old, but as something new, something they do not understand. A ruler whose strength does not come from fear, but from connection. His gaze returned to her, softer now. And I cannot do that alone. I do not want to do that alone. Myra's pulse sped up. Are you asking me to? I am asking, he interrupted gently, if you would allow me to stay, in this town, in your life. Not as a shadow in the corner of a café, but as someone who walks beside you, protects you, learns from you. Perhaps, someday, loves you in a way worthy of the courage you have already shown. There was no dramatic flourish in his words, no practiced charm. Just a quiet, vulnerable hope that made her heart ache. You hardly know me, she said, but there was a tremor of something else under the protest, wonder maybe. I know enough, he replied. I know that you work long hours and still find room in your day to smile at strangers. I know you worry more about others than yourself. I know you saw a silent, unsettling man sitting alone and decided he deserved a rose, not a wider gap between tables. His lips curved in the smallest smile. I have known queens and generals and scholars and monsters. Very few of them have ever shown the simple, stubborn bravery you did when you stood beside me tonight. Silence stretched between them, but it felt peaceful now instead of dangerous. The café around them buzzed with frantic conversation and clattering dishes, but in the cocoon of quiet where they stood, the world seemed to hold its breath. Mara looked down at the rose in her hand, at the faint brown beginning at the edge of its petals. She thought of her small apartment, her tired feet, her jar of tips slowly filling with a dream she had never been able to name. She thought of the way his hand had felt in hers, like holding the night itself and finding it gentler than she'd been taught to believe. I don't know how to live in your world, she said honestly, with kings and monsters and hearts that stop and start again. He nodded, and I do not know how to live in yours, with morning shifts and grocery lists and neighbors who ask too many questions. Their eyes met. Maybe, she said slowly, we could learn together. Something in him eased, like a taut bowstring finally released. Relief, gratitude, and something like joy flashed across his face in quick succession. Then I will learn how to walk in the sun again, he said quietly. And you will learn that the night is not only a place of fear, but also of beauty and loyalty and love. She took a breath, then extended the rose toward him, stem first this time. He hesitated. Are you certain, he asked. This binds you to more than you can yet see. Mara's gaze was clear. I think, she said, I was already bound the moment I decided you deserved this in the first place. He accepted the rose with both hands, almost reverently. As his fingers closed around it, the faint wilting at its edges seemed to pause, as if time itself were willing to wait and see what they became together. Then hear me, he said, his voice soft but carrying a weight she felt in her bones. By the blood on this stem, by the beat of the heart you woke, I swear to use whatever power I have not to rule you, but to walk beside you, to protect your life, not possess it, to honor your courage with my restraint and your kindness with my loyalty." She exhaled a shaky, relieved sound. "You're really dramatic, you know that," she said, a hint of teasing fighting its way through her exhaustion. His smile widened just a little. "I am very old," he admitted. "We did everything dramatically back then." She laughed, a small, tired, genuine laugh that made a few nearby customers look over and relax, even if they didn't know why. The worst had passed. The building still stood, and in the quiet center of it all, something new had begun. "Will they tell stories about this?" she asked, half serious. "They already are," he said. "They just don't know the words yet. For now, it will be the night the windows shattered in the storm and everyone felt something they couldn't explain." "And someday," she pressed. He looked at her the way one might look at a sunrise after centuries of dusk. "Someday," he said softly, "if we do this right, they will tell the story of the girl who gave a rose to the monster in the corner, and in doing so, reminded a king that his heart was meant to love, not to rule." Myra felt warmth flood her chest at his words, not the blazing heat of adrenaline, but a steadier, quieter glow. Something like hope, something like a beginning. The manager approached them then, wringing his hands. "Mara, I don't know what happened tonight," he stammered. "But thank you, I think you saved us, you and your friend." Mara glanced at the man beside her. "Yeah," she said softly, "my friend." The Vampire King inclined his head to the manager with old-fashioned grace. "Thank you for the shelter," he said. "You may want to invest in stronger windows." The manager blinked, then nodded quickly, not entirely sure if it was a joke. He backed away, leaving them alone again. Outside, the storm began to lessen, the rain softening to a steady patter. The streetlights flickered back to full brightness. The world, or at least this small piece of it, began to remember how to be ordinary. "Will you come back tomorrow?" Mara asked, almost shyly, surprising herself with how much the answer mattered. He looked at her as if the question itself were a gift. "If you will have me," he replied. "Perhaps at a more reasonable hour. I hear cafes are quieter in the mornings." She smiled, "Not on weekends." "Then I will learn to like weekends," he said. They stood there a moment longer, two figures caught between the glow of candlelight and the fading threat of shadows. A waitress with tired feet and a stubborn heart. A king who had finally found something he was willing to kneel before. As the café slowly emptied, and the world settled into the fragile, hopeful quiet that comes after any great storm, the story that would someday be told took root in the hearts of those who had been there, even if they didn't yet have the courage to describe it. For now, it was enough that somewhere in the corner of a small-town café, a vampire king held a rose that would not wilt, its petals fed by two tiny drops of blood and a promise neither of them fully understood yet. And it was enough that, when he finally turned to step back into the night, he did not vanish into the shadows as he always had before. He paused at the door, looked back at Myra, and with a quiet, almost bashful smile that belonged more to a man than a legend, said, "Until tomorrow." She nodded, her heart no longer afraid of the darkness outside. "Until tomorrow," she replied. The bell above the door chimed softly as he left, the sound bright and ordinary and completely at odds with what he was. But that was the point now, wasn't it? To be both, to be many things at once. As the door closed and the night embraced him, not as a king in hiding, but as a protector returning to his watch, Myra wiped a stray tear from her cheek and looked down at the faint red mark the thorn had left in her palm. It hurt just a little, but in that small ache, she felt the first, quiet proof that some wounds are simply places where new stories have entered our lives. And this one, she knew, was only just beginning.